This is Dr. Claire Hughes talking to you today about alternative teaching for To Teach. I'm excited to talk about alternative teaching because it's one of the most powerful models of co-teaching that are out there. The very first thing to understand about alternative teaching is that it is not a resource room within the general education classroom. I have seen a few teachers who said, oh yeah, we do alternative teaching, and they've pulled all the kids with special needs into the corner and talk about my kids, and one even walked into a classroom and said, my kids, come on over here. And I just thought, oh, no, that's not alternative teaching. Alternative teaching is the benefits of small group and whole group. And the idea is that every child at some point gets to have the opportunity to be in a small group, while the rest of the kids are in a large group. And when I say all kids, I mean all kids. I mean kids who are gifted, kids who have special needs, and kids in the general public who are also need some small group time and some one-on-one attention with a teacher. The other issue is that in a small group setting, that it is not always the special education teacher. Sometimes it should be the general education teacher. And so with these two kind of pieces in mind, I'm going to talk about the advantages of alternative teaching and how one can go about doing it. The idea of alternative teaching can be done in the same classroom. It's pulling a small group of students out of the larger group, and one of the teachers instructs the large group, and one of the teachers instructs the small group, so that there's the two groups going at the same time, but they are of unequal size. The concept is that they do teach similar, if related content, but it doesn't have to be the same content exactly. It also doesn't have to be on a station rotation where everybody rotates in and out of it, although that is one of the variations. In alternative teaching, one of the teachers takes the small group, and it can be in the same classroom, or it could be in a different classroom. It can often be in a neighboring classroom. I would recommend that when teachers pull a small group, that they not take them to a classroom all the way across campus. You lose a great deal amount of time, literally in the walk between here and there. So that second space should be a space that is close. Then one of the big questions is, who is in the small group? Because anytime you take kids away from a large group, you differentiate them, you make them different, you acknowledge them as different. And the key, like I said at the beginning, is to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to feel special without feeling stigmatized. And that's really the trick of alternative teaching, is that specialness without stigmatization. One thing you can do, one way to identify the kids who go into that small group, is by grouping by readiness. So you can have a small group of kids that are not quite ready to learn the content yet, that is ready for the large group. And so you can pull them aside and do a quick reteach, or even a pre-teach often can happen. If they've gotten to a place where the rest of the group is practicing, and you know that this one small group is going to struggle, you can pull them aside and pre-teach what the content's going to be next, so that they have a heads up. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. That's kind of what happens in a small group. So you can look at readiness, grouping by readiness. So you've got your high, your average, and your low groups. Again, do not group by label. Labels don't tell you much. Readiness is a term that indicates not ability, but capability, in terms of what are they capable of learning next. And it's based on data. Data from the previous day, data from the previous lesson, data from the pretest. It is not based on label. It is not based off of perception. It is not based off of intuition. It is based on data. So you can group by readiness, but the trick when you do group by readiness is to make sure that you circulate the groups, because if all the kids know who's in the Redbird and the Buzzards group, and so if the Buzzards get pulled every time, in other words, meaning the high group or the low group get pulled every time, kids know who they are. So one day you may pull the high group, one day you may pull the low group, one day you may break up the middle group into two groups and pull one of them, and so on and so forth. And so grouping by that way, just making sure that that small group is rotated in by the different groups. Another way of grouping, though, is also by small grouping according to interests. So the lesson may be on something in history, and you may pull a small group aside based on their interest of, this group is identified as serfs, and this group is identified as craftsmen, and pull them aside by their different content areas that they're working with. Break them up into those kinds of things. Another way of doing small grouping like that is to do jigsaw grouping, where the large group is considered the rest of the group, and each of the people in the small group is representative of a group that they're going to go back to. So they're the ambassador group. And so they're going to learn the specialized instruction, they're going to learn specific content, they're going to learn specific directions, whatever you want that small group to do. So you can group by readiness, you can group by interest, you can group by learning styles. The research on learning styles is challenging, but you can certainly group by those who need to walk around and move. You can group by those who need to talk about it and or read. You can have different activities when you pull for the small group. So deciding who's in the small group is the first bit. I saw a teacher once where they would give whole group instruction, and during the whole group instruction they'd be doing quick assessments, and then they would identify a small group of students who needed to come out and be retaught a specific concept that they hadn't gotten in that whole group instruction. So that's an idea of how do you identify who. Now, what happens in that small group? There's a wide variety of things that can happen in the small group. The special service provider can either identify particular strategies. The general education teacher can provide some extra content specialty. There can be extra practice. There can be pre-teaching. There can be reteaching. There can be extended teaching. So if you've pulled out an extensive activity that extends the content or allows the rest of the kids are working on problems 1 through 10, and you're going to pull them aside to work on the challenge problem, and you'll just pull a small group aside to work on the challenge problem. They don't have to be held responsible for problems 1 through 10. They're just held responsible for the challenge problem. So what happens in that small group is very, very flexible. However, it should be very tightly connected to the content that's being taught to the large group. So if the large group is being taught a math concept, then the small group also needs to be working on a related concept to that math concept, so that it isn't fun, it isn't fluffy, it isn't totally outside and irrelated, because then everybody will be wanting to be in that small group. It absolutely needs to be in that content and connected. Now, everybody is going to want to be in that small group if it's done right, and everybody should have the chance to be in that small group. So with alternative teaching, you get a chance to look over and really look at a child and really work with a small group, especially for those who are struggling or those who already understand it and need some extension times. It's particularly powerful. But it can be very, very powerful, for example, in writing, when every student will need time to conference in small groups. And so breaking them into the large group while they're doing a concept, while the small groups are doing writing conferences, or conferencing with each other, or learning how to conference, for example. The lists are endless and are limited only by creativity. But it is an incredibly powerful strategy for alternative teaching, because it really does combine the best of both, the best of a small group with the best of a whole group. And deciding who is in the group and what you're going to do in that group are the two big decisions that need to be made. Thank you so much.